Well, good evening and welcome. Madam Bokova, Director-General of UNESCO, Dr. Karan Singh, Chair of the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education on Peace and Sustainable Development of the Governing Board, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and last but not least, the young future leaders, many of them we have here today, a very warm welcome to MGIEP's first distinguished lecture. Before I pass on the baton to Dr. Karan Singh, who shall be presiding over this lecture, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Institute. We are a new kid on the block, so just wanted to let you know what we are. So it's as Dr. Singh has said, it's a Category 1 UNESCO Institute in the Asia-Pacific region. It's the first one. So what does that mean? What does a Category 1 mean? It's an integral part of UNESCO, which was established based on the approval by all of its member states. And with MGIEP, its mandate is to support UNESCO and the member states by pushing the frontiers of research, in this case on education for peace, sustainable development, and bringing these together to contribute to our latest challenge, how to be a global citizen. And that's why you have a lot of those t-shirts with a global citizen, as the world gets smaller and as we become more interlinked. So if we are going to change the world, we will have to do it together as global citizens, collectively responsible towards each other and our shared value. But what exactly is a global citizen? And we're still grappling with it. But here's a little bit of a teaser. Our global citizens are people whose aspirations, skills, actions, and sense of responsibility transcend the traditional definitions of identity, geography, and opportunity. People who are conscious that they belong to not just their cities and neighborhoods, but to the world at large. People who realize that our complex and interdependent challenges and hopes can only be addressed together. And we think, and I use the word think, but I think we know that you can be that generation. And I'm really reaching out to the younger generation out there in the audience. The youth constitutes a key constituency for our work at MGIEP. I can't resist, as coming from the Institute, to quote from the great Mahatma, or Bapu, as many of you call him here, if we are to teach real peace in this world, we shall have to begin with the children. At MGIEP, we believe every youth is a leader, and we want to foster this leadership to achieve the world of peace and sustainability we all want. The Institute was formally inaugurated on the 11th of November 2012 by the President of India, Sri Pranab Mukherjee, and by the Director-General of UNESCO, Madam Irina Bokova, who we are really happy to have her here today with us, and who will be giving our first distinguished lecture. Thank you very much on behalf of the Institute. But before I finish, you might be wondering, who is this chap talking in front of you? My name is Anantha Duraiappah, the Director of MGIEP, and I hope you will visit us, our website, but do drop by our office. Our doors are always open, and open for ideas, and especially the wackier the idea, the more welcome it is. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the chair of our governing board, Dr. Karan Singh, who I don't have to introduce because that will take the whole lecture itself. So we are lucky to have Dr. Singh at the helm of this institute in his formative years. His many years of experience, as well as the intellectual experience and diversity he brings, will serve good stead as the institute positions itself to be a global player, and we do intend to be a global player in the field of education for peace, sustainability, and global citizenship over the coming years. With that, Dr. Karan Singh, may I invite you to preside over the first distinguished MGIEP lecture.
Thank you, Anand. The concept of a global society is deeply embedded in the Indian cultural tradition. We have this famous statement, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world itself is a family. And this goes back thousands of years. So the idea, even at that time, that in the final analysis, the human race is one family, is not something that is new to India. It is embedded deeply in our consciousness. However, the history of humanity over the last thousands of years has been full of wars and disasters and massacres and killings. Despite all the technological developments that have taken place, we are still not conceptually anywhere near the achievement of the world as a family. And that is where UNESCO comes in. Because UNESCO, as Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, whose 125th birth anniversary we are observing this year, and in whose compound here, this is the National Memorial to Jawaharlal Nehru. The Teen Murti house, which you may have visited, where he lived, and this museum and library that we built thereafter. He said, addressing the General Council of the General Assembly of the UNESCO, held in Delhi in 1956, he said that UNESCO was the conscience of the world. Whereas the United Nations was the political will of the world, UNESCO was the conscience of the world. And the United Nations, it seems to me, is stuck in 1945, is frozen in time. But UNESCO is growing. Despite all the difficulties it is facing, UNESCO is growing, and UNESCO has branched out into a number of very, very important fields. And it is in that connection that we are so happy that the dynamic Director-General, Irina Bokova, has become the Director-General of UNESCO for the last 5 years. I've been interacting with her regularly for the last 5 years as India's representative on the board, and I've been tremendously impressed by not only her dynamism, but by her vision for UNESCO's role in these very difficult times. She has had a very distinguished career. She's from Bulgaria, and she was Minister for Foreign Affairs and Ambassador of Bulgaria to France, Monaco, and UNESCO. And then she held a lot of other international interests and assignments. And she participated in drafting Bulgaria's new constitution and was considerably positive in Bulgaria's accession to the European Union. Now, as the Director General, she has done a great deal to develop quality education. Quality education and education for peace and sustainable development is at the heart of UNESCO's mandate. And this links up also with the United Nations Secretary General's Education First initiative. Irina has received distinctions from around the world and is a linguist knowing many languages. Now, she's going to speak this evening on a very interesting subject: diverse societies, inclusive democracies, new skills for a sustainable world. Now, we in India are a very, very diverse society, and hopefully we are an inclusive democracy. And we find now that this whole question of identity is becoming increasingly important. We no longer can have only one identity. There are multiple identities today. There's our regional identity, our linguistic identity, our religious identity, our national identity, but also there's a global identity, which we must now develop. Because regardless of all the others, every single human being on this earth is part of the global society. So that we now have to develop in a very big way. And how we do that, and what are the skills that we need for that, and what are particularly the educational values that we can transmit to the younger generation. I'm delighted to see so many young people in the audience. Youth is a marvelous thing, but as Bernard Shaw says, youth is a wonderful thing. What a pity it's wasted on the young. But the point being that when you are young, you have to take full advantage of these years to learn, to develop, to grow, to understand new concepts, and to realize that you are living in a world that is being created in front of you. This is a very exciting time to be alive. as a poet again said, bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. So this is a very unique opportunity. So despite all the problems you may face or all the difficulties, you've got to remember your responsibilities as perhaps the first generation of citizens of a global society. And I'm sure that the words of people like Director-General Irina Bokova will remain a source of inspiration to all of you. May I request you, ma'am, now to deliver your speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Singh, for your very, very kind presentation, and also to our director. And to all of your ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, dear young friends, let me say how happy and how honored I am to give this inaugural lecture at the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education for Peace. I recall with great pleasure when we launched the Institute 2 years ago in the presence of His Excellency Mr. Shri Pranab Mukherjee, the President of India. And allow me, first and foremost, to pay tribute. I have to pay tribute to many people. I have first and foremost to pay tribute to His Excellency Dr. Singh, who was instrumental in making this institute a reality today. And as our director of the Institute, Anantha, just said, this is just one of the many contributions that you, Dr. Singh, have made to UNESCO, for which we are extremely grateful. And this is the first such institute, educational institute, not only in India, but also the first in the Asia-Pacific region. Since its inauguration, the institute has gotten off to a quick start, leading through innovation to nurture the transformative power of education for human rights and dignity, for sustainability, and what is the new topic, global citizenship. And it is not by chance that both with Dr. Singh, I think, with all of us and the members of the governing board, we have this very inspiring, I would say, bracelet, I am a global citizen. So I wear this with a lot of pride. Earlier this month in Nagoya, the Institute launched the Yes Peace Network, a collaborative platform to strengthen work for global citizenship, peace building, and sustainable development. I was in Nagoya when this network was launched, and I'm much more confident now that this network will provide a channel to mobilize the collective voice of young women and men and enhance their access to policy making. This institute is leading in consultations about global citizenship education by coordinating position papers, by provoking and encouraging debates, by publishing policy papers, by developing, today we heard, the very innovative approaches like games on peace and sustainable development through a nationwide competition, an extremely impressive work that the Institute is doing. And I'm very pleased the Institute's governing board is up and running and already held its first meeting last March under the chairmanship and guidance of Dr. Karan Singh, and also engaging today in interesting discussions. And let me just come back to where we started at UNESCO, at the General Conference, and how the debate started about creating this institute. Because I think it is not by chance that the institute bears the name of a man who shaped the 20th century, and I would say who continues to inspire us in the 21st century. Throughout its history, as Dr. Karan Singh also reminded us, UNESCO has moved forward thanks to the contribution of great Indian thinkers, thanks to Jawaharlal Nehru, who described indeed UNESCO as the conscience of humanity, thanks to the legacy of the great Sri Aurobindo, whose statue stands proudly on UNESCO's premises. And let me once again say what a big honor was for me to visit Auroville in 2010, thanks to the wisdom of Swami Vivekananda, whose anniversary we celebrated last year at UNESCO headquarters. And in all of this list of eminent humanists, Indian humanists, Mahatma Gandhi has a very special place. His teachings, words, and actions are a source of inspiration that I would say resonate deeply with the spirit and mandate of UNESCO. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "As human beings, our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world as in being able to remake ourselves." And this is what we mean when we speak about the transformative power of education. Today, building on all this, I believe we are launching a new phase in the special relationship between UNESCO and India, including an even sharper focus on the power of education. And I know that this lecture series will be an annual event at the Institute to explore key issues of peace and sustainable development, as well as the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy and thinking. And it is all the more important because we live in times of opportunities, but also in times of great challenges. I would say in turbulent times. In its inaugural speech to the 69th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke of the scale of global transformation today in our societies, in the environment, in the relationships between states and cultures. He spoke of the surge of democracy and human rights, including gender equality in many societies. India, the Prime Minister said, as the largest democracy in the world, stands and must continue to stand at the front of all these challenges. We see indeed the revolutionary impact of new information and communication technologies, shaping a new global public space, tying the global and the local more tightly together. Across the world, countries have made great strides to reach the Millennium Development Goals. There is an unprecedented spread of prosperity in Asia and beyond. All of this carries great hope, and I see this as the essence of a new humanism, drawing on the equal rights and dignity of every woman and man in harmony with others and the world. At the same time, inequalities are deepening. We have made significant advances in healthcare, education, and the quality of life, but there remain far too many people who do not share these advances. Some estimates show that 1% of the world's population now controls between 40 to 50% of the world's wealth. In his speech further on, Prime Minister Modi said, "When we think of the scale of want in the world, 2.5 billion people without access to basic sanitation, 1.3 billion without access to electricity, or 1.1 billion people without access to safe drinking water, we need more comprehensive and concerted direct international action." And I agree fully with this assessment. We at UNESCO consider that this situation calls for stronger policies towards marginalized populations, including in terms of linguistic diversity, education in the mother tongue, greater inclusion. Societies can be healthy and governments can be effective only if they are inclusive, if they bring every citizen together, every woman and man, all young people, especially the most marginalized. And this includes gender equality. This is the urgent challenge in terms of equality and the greatest potential for growth and social inclusion. And I say this 20 years after the Beijing Declaration on Women's Rights, adopted in 1995, at the Beijing Conference on Gender Equality. This commitment towards inclusion also concerns persons with disabilities. And yesterday, I was honored to open the International Conference From Exclusion to Empowerment, the role of ICTs for persons with disabilities, organized by UNESCO and the Government of India, with Mr. Sri Ravi Shankar Prasad, Minister of Communications and Information Technology, Mr. Sri Tawar Chand Genlot, Minister of Social Justice and Empowerment, Ms. Srimati Smriti Zubin Irani, Minister for Human Resource Development, and you, Dr. Karan Singh, which I believe shows true commitment to innovation and inclusion for all societies to move forward. And I was also very privileged to have extensive discussion with Her Excellency the Honorable Minister Irani on our cooperation in these important areas. I believe all this calls for new skills and equal access of men and women, first and foremost, to education. It calls for quality education. It calls for technical vocational training, to fight unemployment, to create skills, to stimulate entrepreneurship. Social and economic transformations are calling out for more innovative approaches to foster development, to reconcile growth with social justice, poverty reduction, and environmental sustainability. In fact, I deeply believe that real sustainability goes beyond the reach of states. It must be grounded in the rights and dignity of every woman and man, in their abilities, skills, and behaviors, in their capacity to transform their lives, anticipate the future, make the most of change. And again, this starts with education, where this institute has a vital role to play to integrate this vision into policies and social strategies. Let us think for a moment of the environment, where we see the rising costs of natural disasters. We see the deepening impact of climate change. We see the planet under pressure. In fact, we are reaching the limits of its boundaries, as scientists very often remind us. This is a call to action, and this has been the spirit guiding the United Nations Decade on Education for Sustainable Development, 2005-2014, that was led by UNESCO. There has been a great progress in terms of awareness and political commitment, but here again, we need to translate this into everyday skills, into sustainable behaviors, and this was the main message of the latest UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, held earlier this month in November in Aichi, Nagoya, in Japan. This conference once again demonstrated by its decisions and the very substantive debate that sustainability cannot be built on technical or financial solutions only. To build green economies, we need green societies. Sustainability requires changes in how we produce and consume. And I would say fundamentally, it requires new ways of seeing the world, new ways of thinking about our responsibilities to each other and to the planet, new ways of acting and behaving already as global citizens. This is why education is the bedrock for sustainability, because it can shape new values, skills, and knowledge we need for the century ahead. Education is the way to connect the dots between the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. And allow me to say again here, this institute can make a decisive difference. We need new skills for a new world. We need transformative learning environments and a renewed focus on experimental learning, where textbook knowledge is supplanted by new forms. Today, our global monitoring report shows that, unfortunately, over 250 million children in the world leave school without being able to read a simple sentence. Something is not working in education system, and we need innovative solutions to change this, to make a quality education a reality. And I believe also that this institute can make a decisive contribution. As Mahatma Gandhi said once, live as you were to die tomorrow. Learn as you were to live forever. I believe this same message was sent by the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize Committee, awarded this year to Kailash Satyarthi, I would say a proud Indian advocate for human rights, for children's rights, and for education, whom I met this morning. I visited him in his office, a strong supporter of UNESCO and a friend of us, and to Malala Yousafzai, another, I would say, relentless, courageous Pakistani girl and advocate for a message that education is one of the most important values for families, communities, and whole societies. And I would say it is not surprised that India, as chair of the E9 Countries Initiative that binds together in a common effort to overcome illiteracy the 9 big countries in the world, most populous countries in the world, has taken a leadership role in advancing literacy, quality education, and widening access to education as a precondition for inclusive democracy and sustainable development. And this is the trust of UNESCO's leadership of the Global Education First initiative, launched by the United Nations Secretary-General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, 2 years ago, where fostering new skills for global citizenship is among its key objectives. Not a single one of us can say that our future is independent of anyone else's. There is an urgent need for our education systems to move beyond literacy and numeracy and inculcate the values, knowledge, and skills on peace, sustainable development, human rights, and democracy in them. Education for global citizenship, which emerges in one of the 3 pillars of this new initiative of the Secretary-General, and I believe will be very strongly inscribed into the future objective of the United Nations when they adopt next year in September the new objective for sustainable development in education. They will include also this notion of education for global citizenship, which seeks to build competencies to translate this vision into action. UNESCO is strongly bringing this message to the negotiations underway between states on shaping this new global, ambitious and universal sustainable agenda to follow 2015, with inclusive, quality education and lifelong learning at its heart. Earlier this year, in Fortaleza, Brazil, the ministers of education from India, Brazil, China, and Russia, the BRICS countries, jointly recognized the strategic importance of education for sustainable development and inclusive economic growth. At the same time, global social transformations require new skills to embrace cultural diversity and make it a force of tolerance, respect, and mutual understanding. This is related to the issue of identity. As you rightfully just mentioned, Dr. Karan Singh, also, how important in a globalized world the question of identity is. Identity can be defined by inherited traditions and customs linked to heritage, religion, language, and nationality. But we consider that its boundaries are increasingly evolving, and it is increasingly plural. Here again, the words of Mahatma Gandhi are inspiring. As he said once, constant development is the law of life, and a man who always tries to maintain his dogmas in order to appear consistent drives himself into a false position. I think differences should not be perceived nowadays as a threat, but as an opportunity for all, guided by respect for human rights. And I think this is the message of a country like India, such a diverse country linguistically, ethnically, religiously, because I believe this is also the key issue of civic education for inclusive democracies in any country today. For far too long, cultural diversity has been seen as a potential challenge to universal human rights. In ever more diverse societies, we must learn to reconcile the two, the cultural diversity that enriches us and the universal human rights that unite us as a single family. We must learn to live together, not just side by side. This is one of the pillars of education for the 21st century, identified in the 1996 Law Report, as was known at that time, and still, learning the treasure within, which you, Dr. Karan Singh, helped shape. And we're revising it today, adapting it to the needs of a new century, but also acknowledging its deep meaning still today for the 21st century, as it was also addressed to. Let me also remind another important document UNESCO adopted in 2001, the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, which sets a clear framework for moving ahead. This declaration says in one of its provisions, no one may invoke cultural diversity to infringe upon human rights, nor to limit their scope. Our task today is to transform these principles into daily behaviors for tolerance and respect, through educational guidelines, through support to teacher training and curricular design, as well as through concrete projects, all to deepen understanding of different cultures and shared histories, to foster new skills for intercultural dialogue. I know that this is not an easy task. Globalization has opened unprecedented opportunities for exchange, but with increasing connections has come heightened fear from many communities, and culture has moved to the front line of many conflicts. Extremists, armed with pickaxes and shovels, set out to destroy Timbuktu's ancient mosques and mausoleums because they claimed these did not fit with their narrow vision of their faith. In Iraq, extremists are seeking to cleanse an entire society of its rich cultural diversity, persecuting minorities and destroying heritage. The stakes are high. We must respond to extremism, to these narrow visions of history, values, and humanity, guided by the vision of Mahatma Gandhi, who said clearly, no culture can live if it attempts to be exclusive. What a wise words and how relevant they are today. And I recall also, dear friends, the speech given by Professor Amartya Sen during the World Culture Forum in Indonesia, in Bali last year, when he said that what is called Western science, in fact, draws on a long chain of intellectual relations, linking Western mathematics and science to a wide range of distinctly non-Western practitioners and traditions. He took the example of the world's oldest university, Nalanda, which flourished on Pan-Asian cooperation, involving India, Indonesia, and China, but also Korea, Japan, Thailand, and other countries from about 1,500 years ago. I'm convinced knowledge about the depth of such interaction can help reduce tensions today. This is why UNESCO has crafted normative instruments and programs to safeguard the common heritage of humanity and to promote the diversity of cultural expressions. And this is why UNESCO is advocating for the post-2015 development agenda to recognize the enabling power of culture for poverty eradication, for social inclusion, for sustainability, and for tolerance. And last but not least, I believe the wealth of India's cultural heritage, including 32 World Heritage Sites, from the Buddhist monuments of Sanchi, the Taj Mahal, to hill forts of Rajasthan, this is a gift to the world, part of the shared history of humanity, and I would say a foundation for global citizenship. The last two new sites inscribed this year, Rani Ki Vav, the Queen's Stepwell at Patan, Gujarat, and the Great Himalayan National Park in Himachal Pradesh, embody the concept of outstanding universal value, which is at the heart of the World Heritage Convention. UNESCO also works to safeguard heritage stretching across entire continents, embodied, for instance, in description of the Chapaknyan on the World Heritage List, the main Andean road, bringing together Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, 6 countries with common history, both tangible and intangible heritage of a great civilization of the Indian people. I'm thinking also of the Silk Roads or the tradition of Nowruz shared across Asia. These are ways to understand how different people and cultures have always worked together and how they can do so today. The UNESCO Slave Route project is guided by similar objectives and spirit. Initiated in 1994, we celebrate the project's 20th anniversary this year. This September, UNESCO hosted a fascinating exhibition of African diaspora in India, organized by the delegation of India. And I recall also a very interesting presentation during the last session of the World Heritage Committee on shared maritime heritage across the Indian Ocean, showing the links that trade and travels have woven between peoples. We, in fact, saw that also at headquarters just last month. I believe that theories of the clash of civilization ignore these realities. And in an increasingly interconnected world, we must tirelessly recall this truth, especially to you, to the young people, to foster cohesion, understanding, cultural literacy, dialogue, and in the end of the day, peace. So, in the spirit of the call by Prime Minister Modi for greater entrepreneurial skills among young people, I appeal for the development of intercultural skills across all society. This is the way to build stronger unity, not only within countries, but across the world. As the Prime Minister said in his speech on India's Independence Day, we walk together, we move together, we think together, we resolve together, and together we take this country forward. I believe this vision has deep roots in Indian history and society, because harnessing cultural diversity is essential to mobilize new ideas, to stimulate innovation and creativity. We have an abundance of examples of why it is important for culture to be recognized as an enabler for sustainability in the global development agenda that we follow 2015. I believe countries that invest today in cultural literacy, in intercultural skills, will hold the keys to cooperation among societies and within them. And we know all too well, this does not happen by itself. It takes new forms of dialogue and skills, of leadership. We need new linguistic skills. This is the importance also of this institute, to support the process of designing effective policies and guidelines for teachers, policymakers, as well as young people and ordinary citizens. And this is, in fact, the goal that guides the International Decade for Rapprochement of Cultures that the United Nations, the General Assembly, announced last year, 2013-2022, which UNESCO is leading all across the United Nations system. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear young friends, UNESCO's cooperation with India shows what can be done to make concrete change happen. Think of the Internal Migration in India initiative, spearheaded by the UNESCO office here in New Delhi. Recognizing the lack of sufficient knowledge about issues emerging from internal migration, this initiative is bringing together partners from government, civil society, private sector, key partners from the United Nations system, and to identify key challenges facing internal migrants. In response, 10 areas of innovative practice have been identified, providing evidence-based capacity development for those working on the ground. Or take the Gender, Youth and Migration web portal developed by UNESCO, UNICEF and United Nations Women here in Delhi. This project provides an online knowledge sharing platform linking researchers, policy practitioners, decision makers for sharing knowledge, and I would say for stronger public action. So I'm more than convinced that the Mahatma Gandhi Institute on Education for Peace is already emerging as a model platform for the innovation all societies need today to foster new skills for new times. The future, we know, will be built here and on the benches of schools. I know that 65% of India's population is under the age of 35, and all of them need jobs, need skills to become lawyers, engineers, researchers, scientists, entrepreneurs, teachers, to move this country forward, to move, I would say, the world forward. UNESCO will bring all of its experience to support this, what we call revolution of skills, to nurture not only effective and competent workers, but inclusive and tolerant citizens. Nearly 70 years ago, when the UNESCO Constitution was first signed, it read, "Peace based inclusively upon the political and economic arrangements of governments would not be a peace which could secure the unanimous, lasting and sincere support of the peoples of the world. Peace must therefore be founded, if it is not to fail, upon the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind." I believe that you agree with me. These words have not aged a day. Sustainability must be built upon a firm commitment to put education and training at the center of all public policies, to empower learners to transform their lives and build a more sustainable world. This is the vision the Institute is promoting, and in doing so, it contributes to the rejuvenating of the spirit of UNESCO, to renewing UNESCO to the needs of the world today as we celebrate our 70th anniversary. So I would say, I dare say, this institute is something of a gift of India to UNESCO. And standing with you here today, I can feel the immense hope that exists, that something is changing in the world, drawing on Mahatma Gandhi's internal legacy. Be the change you wish to see in the world. In this spirit, I would like to thank you for your attention. And at the end of this special lecture, allow me a very, I would say, emotional and special moment. I would like to recognize the immense contribution of Dr. Karan Singh for the establishment of the Institute. And I would say this is probably one of his last, not the first, not even the second contribution to UNESCO. The last, but very, I would say, substantial and very meaningful, because this institute, as I try to testify here with you and to put strong arguments, goes to the very heart of UNESCO's mission. We often speak at UNESCO not about activities or projects or programs. We speak about a mission, because I believe we have a very important mission, and that is why UNESCO has been created. And if UNESCO has been very deep into the message of peace and the transformation of the world, it is because UNESCO had all these great humanists, intellectuals, leaders, moral leaders, credible leaders like Dr. Karan Singh to contribute to the spreading of this message and to convince also civil society, politicians, governments into the importance of this transformation. And he has never stopped relentlessly, he has been evolving also with the evolution in the world. And the fact that he was contributing so much to the report, important the law, still very much into the minds of educators and political thinkers around the world about education for the 21st century. And now coming, I would say, to the establishment of this institute is for us an enormous pride. We take this as an enormous pride. I always say that UNESCO is not just in headquarters. UNESCO is not in Paris. UNESCO is in the world. UNESCO is here now at this very moment. And UNESCO is also in this institute, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace. And in recognition of his contribution, allow me to present to him a very modest, I would say, recognition, which is our Tree of Peace. It has been elaborated by a UNESCO artist for peace, Ed Vasser, and a special tribute to you, Dr. Singh, and also of remembrance of this very special moment for us. So thank you very much for your attention. This was the ending of my lecture.
Thank you, Irina. That's a very pleasant surprise, and will remain as a memento of my very interesting association with UNESCO. Just 2 or 3 things I want to take off from what you said in your very interesting speech, which will give us a lot of valuable guidelines for the Institute in the years to come. I just want to tell the audience that UNESCO is doing a tremendous job in heritage, both tangible heritage and intangible heritage, because it has drawn up lists and around the world of these 2 different types of heritages of the world. And we are also watching in horror, as in West Asia, people who claim to be Muslims are destroying some of the finest works of art and architecture that the Muslim civilization has produced. I think it's a tragedy. And the Director-General was in Baghdad, in fact, very recently and visited some of the sites there. So it is really terrible when you have these sort of wars the way destruction takes place. Look at the way the Taliban blew up the Bamiyan Buddhas. An act of absolute barbarism, I think. So we've got to be very careful to see that the heritage that we have, particularly in this country, is maintained. Also, I'm glad you mentioned Auroville, because as chairman of the Auroville Foundation, I'd like to bring to the notice of the audience that Auroville is a unique, multi-religious, multicultural, multilinguistic, multi-ethnic community near Pondicherry, based on the principles of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And that has been supported by UNESCO. In fact, over all these years, several resolutions have been passed. And finally, I want to tell you, I am perhaps the only person in this hall, certainly, who's actually met Mahatma Gandhi. And that is something. It was in prehistoric times, of course, long before most of you were born, but nonetheless, I thought I'd put that on the record. So this Gandhi Institute particularly is Gandhi, not simply for me an iconic figure of the past. It is somebody whom I've met and sat near to. So, anyhow, that is, thank you, and thank you very much for this beautiful gift. Now what I'm going to do is to open this meeting for any questions which members of the audience may like to ask, and the Director General has kindly offered 15-20 minutes for an interaction. If there's anybody who does, I hope there are microphones somewhere in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Namaskar. Madam Secretary, I have a question. During your lecture, as Dr. Karan Singh also outlined, that with the rising tide of extremism in West Asia, there is a very serious threat to some of those Islamic sites, and they are being blown up in. So the entire culture is being threatened. So my question is, what steps is the UNESCO taking in order to preserve that and save them from not becoming another Bamiyan? Thank you.
Well, you touch really a very important concern that we have at UNESCO, and what we see nowadays and what we cannot accept is that destruction of heritage and culture is not some kind of a collateral damage in a conflict, but it's a very deliberate destruction. Something extremely dangerous is coming into the world. And appalling, because we haven't seen such kind of a deliberate destruction and ethnic or cultural, I would say, cleansing in the modern history, I would say. Although with 20th century atrocities of the 20th century and the wars, they were really big crimes, but we cannot accept this to happen. And what is also very disturbing, and of course we saw that in Mali, when I went to Mali, I visited maybe 2 weeks after with the French president at that time, and I was appalled when I saw these mausoleums, which have been there for 1,000 years, with all the, I would say, ups and downs in history, with all the different invasions of different empires, of different dominations, and different day state. And all of a sudden in the 21st century, people come with shovel and destroy because they think that this is not exactly according to their very narrow vision of what they... And I think we cannot accept this. The same things happens nowadays in the occupied part of Iraq and others. And of course, first and foremost, what we do, we ring the bell of alarm to the world so that this is not accepted as a collateral damage, but it is very much part of the political and security response in these situations. We have done a lot of work, of advocacy and otherwise with Security Council, so that when they adopt resolutions, heritage is considered among the humanitarian situations, because we consider that the humanitarian disaster is so closely linked with this destruction. It is part of identities of people. That's why they want to destroy. They want to destroy the identities. They want just that these minorities disappear, that is, if they have never existed. And that's why, or these cultures, that's why they destroy them. We are working very much with the all partners, civil society on the ground. We are establishing an observatory of cultural heritage in Syria, for example. It will be established in our office in Beirut, and we just had an important meeting of on an expert level from Aleppo, from different belongings, political affiliations. This is not, we are not about, so to say, security and political issues, but try to bring the message that maybe some kind of a, when they think about humanitarian response and corridors, that heritage also is taken on board. And one last thing, I think what is very dangerous nowadays, it is the illicit archaeological excavations and illicit trafficking of objects of art. Because when I went to Baghdad earlier this month, I went directly to the Museum of Baghdad, which is emblematic for pillaging and for stolen objects, for destruction once again of this heritage, where UNESCO has been working and continues to work until this very day of restoring, and half of the objects have been also restored, and even some of the halls are being renovated. We work with governments, with the big auction houses, with big museums, with Interpol, with the Customs Organization International, to prevent illicit trafficking of objects of art of these countries, because what is happening is extremists export and sell them and continue to finance their activities, among other, of course, sources of income they have. So it's layers, I would say, a multitude of issues that are related here, but the most important is to create this global acceptance mentality of not rejecting this, I would say, this approach and this practice.
Yeah, thank you. The illicit trading in objects of art, of course, is a well-established disaster. There's more Indian art in private collections in New York than there is in India, and the whole of India. And they've all been smuggled out. But this is a new thing, a deliberate smashing of items, and then selling some of them to finance those very people who smashed them. I mean, this is something really totally aghast. It left us all aghast. Anybody else for a question? Yes, beta. You got the mic?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. My question is, like, in this world, we are facing terrorism. Terrorism is one of the major problems, and which is not letting the peace to be stabilized in the world. And this is not a new practice that terrorism has emerged in last 50 or 60 years. It has been long back. In history, the terrorism existed, and still the terrorist groups are there. So, what I pondered upon this, that why the people become terrorists, and why they start destroying the countries, why they start destroying the heritage sites. So, I thought somewhere the people are not satisfied with the policies, or their what they want is not done. So what the UNESCO and the agencies, whoever are promoting peace in the world, are doing to communicate with those people who are again and again arising, but their greeds or whatever their wants are not satisfied, and still the terrorist groups are emerging. That's it. Thank you, ma'am.
My question being that in rural India, a lot of people think that the education in schools is something of a Western influence. And so they reject this idea and believe that if their children go to school, then they're being influenced by Western culture. So ma'am, how will this idea of education reach the people in rural India and they understand the importance of this education as well as the idea of global citizenship?
I think this question maybe Dr. Singh may respond better, but let me just take the first one maybe about, I do agree with you that in order to fight terrorism, sometimes we have to see exactly what motivates some of these extremist or terrorist groups. And in this particular case, when we speak about destruction and heritage, what is happening in Iraq, particularly because this is where we see it is this very narrow understanding about identity, about the others. It is lack of recognition, lack of respect towards the others. I think the most important part of this world, and maybe challenge of this world, is to, as was, by the way, the law report, of how to live together. I think tolerance is becoming a challenge for many societies and many communities today, because the opening, the globalization, the interconnectivity, the opening, I would say, of this world has put people in front of each other. Previously, it was very easy to say, I'm tolerant, because I'm tolerant about other religion, other ethnicity, or other group, because they are living somewhere outside me. Now we live next to each other. We have increasingly globalized cities. We have cities where, I know internal migration, I mentioned this project, in some other also parts, the world is on the move. And I think sometimes new technologies even advance human spirit, that as if people are not prepared for this challenge and they seek refuge to their own kind of perceptions about the others. And that is why I believe that education systems are not prepared either for this development. We have to constantly review curricula. We have to give a very different meaning to education nowadays. That's why we speak about education for global citizenship. It is not just read and write. It is not just knowing mathematics. Even knowing mathematics and how we present, we spoke today also sciences. Always we have to have this deep meaning of the diversity in the world. And one of the most difficult, I think, the most difficult challenges in this world is how we manage this diversity. You can adopt the regulations for the banks or for the world trade and for otherwise. But this important issue about identities and, as we say, multiple identities and living together, we are still far away, in my view, from really achieving this more balanced state in the world. So here, once again, education plays a hugely important role. Education about the others, about the histories of the others, about the knowledge of the others, about the knowledge of its own history and culture. That is why our work in the heritage protection is so important. We present to the world different histories, different cultures, and we say, this is important for everybody. This is outstanding universal value. This is a huge respect to the others. And this teaches also, this teaches tolerance, and this teaches respect for the others. The same with intangible heritage, valuing a tradition in a small community, somewhere, any place in the world. It means we tell them you're important. It may be only yours, but it's important for everybody, because you are contributing in this way also to cultures in the world. So I think this work is extremely important. But as I say, education systems in many parts, curricular, teachers, sensitivity, attitudes, still are far from what we think should be in order to have a much more peaceful world.
Yes, I think that is where education is so important. The problem, of course, is that those countries and societies that are already fundamentalist, they won't allow the education system to bring in any of these global values. I mentioned to you that, I don't want to mention any country by name, but if you get the textbooks of some countries, you will find that the textbooks are full of hatred and animosity towards other religions. How will the children ever grow up with these global values? Of course, now all the barriers have been broken because of the internet and because of all the electronic things. So that perhaps is the best hope. There was somebody there who wanted to ask a question. You can't all ask questions. Go ahead, that one of them. That is one person.
So my question, good evening, respected sirs and ma'am. My question is that when we talk about having a global citizenship, since we have problems like state issues and economic issues, so how does UNESCO intend to transcend all such boundaries in the face of such big challenges to the idea of making a global citizen? How does UNESCO intend to cross these boundaries to actually make the concept of global citizen a success?
Which boundaries?
So for example, that there are ongoing conflicts, like there are state conflicts, there are economic conflicts between countries.
Okay.
So social, political, and economic boundaries, all three of them, how does UNESCO attempt to transcend these boundaries?
I think I would ask our director to say what the Institute intends to do. It's very, very impressive.
Well, the way the system is set up right now, we are talking about our education system, it tends to focus more in terms of within borders. It can be spatial borders. And I think that there's a lack of understanding of how interconnected we are. So when we look at a trade issue, we look at it purely as a monetary exchange, but it goes beyond that. So how are we kind of interlinked in the sense what you do in this part of the world has an impact on a very small village in another part of the world. So what we are trying to do is then kind of have this youth platform, the Yes piece, where we have a dialogue among youths from different parts of the world, sort of bring their stories online. So you start to get to understand how somebody else living many, many miles away on how they address certain issues. And so we're not talking, when you think about global citizenship, I think one of the first things people think about is like a legal instrument where you have a passport. We're not talking about that level. We're talking at a moral imperative in the sense of values. We're talking about tolerance, but actually even going beyond tolerance, inclusiveness of others within your space of operations. So that's the kind of approach that we are putting into the education, the way that we are, through an informal way of education. So we're kind of going to be developing games that seems to be like something that a lot of young people really like to take on, playing games, and how you look at it through a game, how you see the interconnectedness between different parts of the world.
Anybody from this side? Very silent. Come a minute.
Mine is not a question, but just a comment. Madame Bokova, thank you very much for a most inspirational address. And what is particularly reassuring for those of us who've engaged with education is that you have carried in a way the vision of Dr. Karan Singh closer to our hearts than it's been before. You know, he's been an inspirational figure for us, talking about how we need a metanoia to look at different ways of seeing and being, and to build our educational systems on the basis of what is best in our Indian traditions, and yet marry it with the liberal outlook of democracy, inclusivity, and equity and justice and gender justice. So in a sense, I'm here as an Indian citizen, hoping to become a global citizen, to thank all three of you for providing us this great platform, this great opportunity to look at an option-generating capacity, something that gives us hope, something that makes despair unconvincing and hope practical. So I really wanted to say thank you to all three of you, and thank you for this fantastic institute. And I'm so glad we are celebrating a great life, a great educator, and we hope to be inspired continually. Thank you very much.
Well, it's 5:15. What I'm now going to do is to ask Mr. Shigeru Aogi, who is the Director UNESCO representative in India, to make some closing remarks and propose a vote of thanks.
Well, thank you so much. the Madam Director General, Mrs. Irina Bokova, and then the chairperson of the governing body of the Institute, Dr. Karan Singh, who is also the member of the UNESCO Executive Board, and then my colleague, the Anantha, the director of the Institute, Mahatma Gandhi Institute, and their friends, colleagues, and excellencies. I really thank the very inspiring and impressive lecture given by our Director General, Madam Irina Bokova. In her speech lecture, she mentioned about the importance of UNESCO's kind of the mission. She repeatedly reminded us that we have to live up to the guiding principle of the UNESCO establishment, which is keeping and promoting the universal value of democracy, freedom, equity, equality, and the freedom. At this moment, we are facing a lot of the global challenges which risk the sustainable development in this world. If we cannot maintain our limited resources in many senses, the future generation, you people, will be facing a very big difficulties. So it is now we have to take action from small things should fine to look at the globally, but act locally. The Dr. Karan Singh mentioned at his opening remarks that UNESCO is conscious of the world. And then he also mentioned planet is very small, planet itself is a family. So this is really, really key messages UNESCO has bring to every corner of the world. We discussed tolerance, we discussed violence, and then many young people start questioned about terrorism. How we can live up with there's something happening in different world and different corner of the country. My colleague Anantha also said that what you are doing will affect at the corner of the village, the different world, for example, the CO2 emission, and then the food crisis. All these global challenges are connected. Some youngsters, young friends questioned about the borderless world and how we can create tolerant and then the peaceful world with beyond the border and then beyond the belief and beyond the religion and ethnics. UNESCO is very proud of. I'm very proud of saying that UNESCO is a house of peace. And then through education, through communication, information, through culture, through sciences, we live up to the universal and global values. Well, we are now the world is discussing the post-2015 the Sustainable Development Agenda. As you may know, the Open Working Group, United Nations Open Working Group, issued zero draft June this year, which has the 17 global goals to be achieved by 2030. And then education is the goal number 4, which is a very important factor. But at the same time, we have to look at how we can connect all these issues of ocean, urbanization, education, poverty, health, all these are connected. So what I want to say at the end of this very important and significant, impressive lecture is, let's think about real action we have to take now at this moment. Your action, my young friends, will create the future where your children, your grandchildren should live on this very tiny planet. Well, we received a lot of the inspirations and then the insightful reflections from our Director General, Madame Bokova, and also Dr. Karan Singh. I thank you so much on behalf of the UNESCO New Delhi office and then all the audience. Let me join the big hands to these two very wonderful speakers.
Thank you. Before I close the meeting, I would like to recognize in the audience 2 members of our governing body who are members of the executive committee, Dr. Tao Zhan from China, and Dr. Virginia Miruli, if that's the correct pronunciation, from the Philippines. Thank you all very much. And now, Professor Govinda. Of course, I've got to mention Professor Govinda because it is in his area that we are functioning. And he's also a member of our governing board. And now, while thanking all of you and thanking you particularly, Irina, I invite you all for a cup of tea.